Hello, delegators. Welcome to another live stream with TitanNode, the #1 place to delegate your stake. Today, we're going to be doing a review of the highlights of the Congress meeting that happened last week, all about Web3. Now, if you haven't watched this, it's about just about 5 hours long. And what I've done is I've cut out all the clips that are relative to anything Web3 and anything to do with specifics of crypto. So let's just go ahead and watch together, and let's just see what is this all about. Now, I thought I spent the whole time watching this. I watched the whole thing and clipped out the best pieces. So hopefully this will save you some time from watching everything, because there were some pretty dry parts in it. So I clipped them all together. So let's just go ahead and watch them and see what in them so far. If you have any questions or comments, just throw them in chat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2021 was the year of the cryptocurrency. More Americans than ever are taking notice of this transformational technology. DeFi, DAOs, NFTs, Web3, jargon that was once just used on crypto Twitter, they are quickly becoming part of the lexicon.
I will say, so this was the opening statement from the congressman who had organized all this. And I think it's really interesting that he's actually focusing on like Web3 and not just what is crypto or any of this stuff. Like it's really important that Congress is talking more about protocols like LivePeer or any of these Web3 products, because they're just so different from Bitcoin. I was actually surprised by how little Bitcoin was referenced in this entire thing. So, but this, I think, is really an impactful entrance into the entire conversation that's been had. So we'll just keep going.
Technology and its adoption are moving fast. Entrepreneurs and innovators are building and deploying the next generation of the internet. And firms like the ones before us are the on-ramp for many Americans to participate in the digital asset ecosystem. But this panel is only a bit of that broad ecosystem, and this is the first time Congress is having a hearing about cryptocurrencies in its fullness. But as with any new and fast-growing industry, there are questions that need to be answered. I want to be clear, though. This technology is already regulated. Now, the regulations may be clunky, they may not be up to date. I ask my friends, my policymaker friends here on the Hill, this question. Do you know enough about this technology to have a serious debate? Now, if the answer is no, then we need to first seek to understand, to build up that understanding of this new technology so we can have a serious debate on how we appropriately respond and update regulations and perhaps laws.
It's pretty reasonable.
But I should be clear, the goal today is to listen, learn, and ask questions. This technology is new and exciting. It promises a new direction for financial economies, services, and products. I further ask this question, though, how do we make sure as American policymakers that this cryptocurrency revolution, this technology revolution, happens in the U.S. and not overseas? There are a lot of questions we have to answer. But of course, we need reasonable rules of the road. We know that. We don't need knee-jerk reactions by lawmakers to regulate out of fear of the unknown rather than seeking to understand. And that fear of the unknown and the move to regulate before understanding will only stifle American ingenuity and put us at a competitive disadvantage. Throughout history, we've seen examples, countless harmful examples of overregulation around the world by governments. In the late 1800s, England reacted to the rise of cars with laws that required 3 people to operate vehicles at all times. 1 to drive, a 2nd to fuel up the vehicle, and a 3rd to stand in front of the car and wave a red flag. Now, Congress should not be dumb enough to raise a red flag around this technology revolution. We should embrace it, we should understand it, and we should be the international leaders in this space. Further example I would tell you is Skype. The video conferencing platform that, may still be a little clunky, but was vital during the COVID shutdowns that we just experienced. It was vital for some of our kids to even go to school or even have hearings on this massive screen here.
I will say that actually after I watched this hearing, there was so many live streamed Congress people, so like congressmen, congresswomen from like all over the states that had to live stream in due to like COVID and stuff. And I just reminded me of like just how different things are changing. And so it's even more impactful now that like they really pay attention to Web3, because things like LivePeer, things like decentralized web, and DAOs, like this is probably how DAOs are going to be created in the future with this type of like structure, but everything will be live streamed and live, right? So I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
You know, Skype was illegal in most of the world when it was launched. There wasn't a regulatory infrastructure in place that allowed this novel technology, this new technology. And finally, when an invention called the internet began to boom, U.S. lawmakers and regulators struggled to fully grasp the immense possibilities of this innovation out the gate. Now, that was the early 90s, and I think we're in a similar state with Web3 30 years later for Congress first to understand before we would seek to legislate. Now, it would be nearly impossible to go a day without using the internet to communicate, we know that, or move from point A to point B, we know that, or purchase necessities for our families, we know that. I would argue that the nascent technology we're discussing today will have just as much impact on our daily lives, perhaps more. And that's why we must get this right. My fear, however, is that we'll have a partisan divide here. Well, my fear is that some of my Democrat colleagues have already made up their minds, and they have regulatory bills that they're going to file in order to stifle this innovation or to kill it before it fully grows and blossoms. I hope we can work together in a bipartisan way, and I hope this hearing is first of many for us to understand and get clarity from innovators and entrepreneurs about what is needed. This will allow us, which I think should allow us to have these markets thrive and grow while protecting our consumers and giving clear rules of the road to prevent fraud and manipulation. Forcing the private sector to navigate unclear public statements and regulation by enforcement is the wrong approach. So is demonizing an entire industry based off the headlines garnered by a few bad actors. Understandably, there are concerns with the use of cryptocurrencies for nefarious activities. Let me address that. You know what else is used for nefarious activities?
Cash.
Cash. So let's dispel the rumor now that digital asset technology is a looming threat to our financial system. Instead, we should work to fully understand the opportunities the next generation of the internet could provide to Americans. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I look forward to having a deeper understanding as a policymaker about the ramifications for action by Congress before we understand this new technology that is now actually a decade old. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you for having the hearing. Thank you for working with us on a bipartisan panel. And I hope members will take the same spirit of bipartisan cooperation in their questioning and their seeking to understand. With that, I yield back.
See, finally, it feels like Congress has someone who's speaking on behalf of the crypto community that's actually being positive about cryptos for once. I really like the idea of him trying to bring it together and actually having an understanding of what Web3 is, because most of these Congress people are older and probably don't even understand how Web 2 works yet. So that was the opening statement, and I thought it was really really powerful because it set the stage for the rest of the entire meeting. So pretty interesting. Regulation of Web 3.
Americans deserve to know what our national policy is for a decentralized Web 3 powered by crypto assets. Treating crypto as a single unitary activity whose main feature is a need for financial regulation would be like treating the original internet in the 1990s as primarily a tax policy issue. We didn't do that then. What we had in the 1990s with respect to Web 1 that we lack today with respect to crypto is a comprehensive national policy predicated first on the notion of do no harm to the emerging network. Today, instead of focusing only on micro questions, such as whether a particular token is a security or whether a particular exchange-traded fund may be offered, it would be worthwhile for the elected branches of government to grapple with the bigger questions, such as, do we believe a user-controlled decentralized internet is better than an internet largely controlled by 5 big companies? Do we believe that the financial services sector is any less subject to network effects than information and commerce were in earlier iterations of the internet? Do we trust big banks more or open source software more as a tool for maintaining ledgers of account and allocating credit and capital? Can we recognize the difference between crypto projects failing for lack of demand, just as many publicly traded companies fail, and the difference between individual crypto projects actually being scams unworthy of being presented to the fair but sometimes harsh judgment of markets?
I like it. He's actually asking questions that make sense and might make you think, wow, this is not much different than the stock market, because there are a lot of scams still in the stock market, although probably a lot less. But I mean, there is a big difference between a scam coin and like a legitimate project that just has no demand, right? And you should not be penalized for investing in something that is legitimate, but just like doesn't solve a big enough problem, so you lose your money, right? There's a big difference between scams and bad ideas. So let people lose their money on a bad idea, right? I think that's fine, right? Decentralizing lowers risk. I think this is Mr. Brooks keeps talking about. By the way, Mr. Brooks is a boss. He knows. He's probably the most interesting guy on this panel. He really knows what he's talking about and has probably the best things to say. Some of the other people on the panel were pretty annoying, actually, and super biased. Like the girl from Stellar, just pumping her own blockchain on Congress TV, right?
Crypto policy should take into account not only any new risks introduced into the system, but also the risk in the present system that are solved by decentralization. Having issued almost $1 billion in civil money penalties against banks and bank executives during my tenure leading the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, it is clear to me that the present financial system has plenty of examples of risks and costs and safety and soundness problems that are being addressed in the current system.
Like investing in Chinese companies that don't actually have the assets they say they do. Funny that.
Shouldn't we take seriously the possibility that algorithms and open source software that take a measure of human error, greed, negligence, fraud, and bias out of the system might actually make the system better on net, even if there are some new risks being presented that need to be understood and regulated?
American cooperativeness.
Points specific to my current perspective on the crypto economy. One relates to the effect of U.S. crypto regulation on American competitiveness in both the technology and capital markets sectors. There are a number of examples of U.S. regulatory decisions that have driven legitimate activity offshore in ways that harm U.S. investors, innovators, and workers. Can anyone explain, for example, why Fidelity Investments, one of America's best-known investment advisors, had to go to Canada to offer a Bitcoin ETF?
Shout out to Canada.
Or why physically settled crypto ETFs are safe and legal in Germany, Brazil, Singapore, and elsewhere, but somehow not in the United States? Can anyone explain why crypto exchanges, stablecoin issuers, and others can receive e-money licenses to access the payment system in the United Kingdom, but in the United States are reserved exclusively for chartered banks?
Shout out to
with
the UK.
The result that the GDP cost of the payment system in the US is roughly 4 times the cost in the UK. For that matter, why is there no clear path for crypto-focused insured depositories chartered in the state of Wyoming to access Federal Reserve payment services like other insured depositories? These are the big questions that I hope to address today. Thank you, Madam Chairman, Ranking Member Henry.
Mr. Brooks is a boss. The utility phase.
Which indicates to us that crypto has moved past its initial investment phase, and we are now in the...
I like the idea that these people are talking about specifics about what the crypto industry is turning into, specifically Web3. Like, I think is really powerful, the conversation that's happening. If you're like, you subscribe to the lengthening bull run theory, which is, you know, we are going to have a longer bull run this cycle, and we still haven't hit the blow off top. The conversations that are happening in U.S. Congress right now, these were not conversations happening back in 2017. In 2017, it was like, listen, Bitcoin's a Ponzi. No one should be in it. Like, everyone needs to get out. Now the conversation has totally flipped on its head, which I think is really interesting and powerful, really, for the entire ecosystem long term. I still think there'll be a bubble, but like long term, probably a good indication of the trend which we're going.
Long expected utility phase of this ecosystem. Since our founding, Coinbase has strived to be the most secure, trusted, and legally compliant bridge to the crypto economy. Coinbase is federally registered as a money services business with FinCEN, licensed as a money transmitter in 42 states, holds a BIT license and trust charter from the New York Department of Financial Services, and we are authorized to engage in consumer lending in 15 states. We have a robust AML and BSA program, and we are one of only 2 digital asset members of the Department of Treasury's Bank Secrecy Act Advisory Group. In addition to the various state regulatory regimes, we are subject to federal oversight from Treasury, the CFTC, SEC, FTC, and CFPB.
Shout out to Coinbase.
Much like the adoption curve of the internet in the 1990s, we are seeing dramatic advancements in crypto participation. There are more than 220 million crypto holders globally.
That's crazy, by the way. 220 million crypto holders. I did not know that. That is a lot more than when I got in 2013.
Around 16% of Americans have invested in, traded, or used cryptocurrency.
Question for you guys. Is 16% of your population using crypto, is that still in the early adopter phase, or are we entering the early majority phase, right? Like the chasm, if you wanted to jump, crossing the chasm, which is like, I think crypto in general is crossing the chasm as we speak. Like it's getting more mainstream, and I think the early majority are about to join, which is exactly when you get the bubble. So interesting statistics from Coinbase.
Total crypto market capitalization at the end of the third quarter was over $2 trillion, up from $800 billion as of the end of 2020. Coinbase's platform is powering the crypto economy, a new financial system for the internet age, which we believe is a critical infrastructure layer to Web 3.0. Technologies like non-fungible tokens, which we call NFTs, and decentralized application platforms will lead the way to Web 3.0, which will revolutionize the internet. Much like the industry was revolutionized when it went from static content to the dynamic engagement content we have today.
Just talking to each
We
other.
believe sound regulation is central to fueling crypto innovation and adoption. That is why we introduced our digital asset policy proposal, which we refer to as DApp. The DApp assessed the challenges of the existing regulatory framework and proposed a 4-pillar solution. First, we believe the government should recognize digital assets under a new, comprehensive framework that recognizes the unique technological innovations underpinning digital assets.
Agreed.
Second, the responsibility for this new framework should be assigned to a single federal regulator. This regulator would be charged with establishing a registration process for intermediaries, which we refer to as marketplaces for digital assets.
Or how about just no regulator? That'd be fun.
This new framework should have 3 goals to ensure holders of digital assets are empowered and protected. A, we believe in enhanced transparency through robust and appropriate disclosure requirements. B, we want to protect against fraud and market manipulation. And C, we want to promote efficiency and strengthen our market resilience.
Just reading off the paper, like
our fourth and final pillar is to ensure that regulatory solutions promote interoperability and fair competition. In conclusion, Coinbase believes crypto will drive transformational change across society in positive ways. This is why our mission is to promote economic freedom around the world. Disruption always challenges the status quo, but we believe sound policies can improve the system for everyone. We applaud Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, and the members of this committee for holding this important hearing.
Brownie
Thank
points.
you for the opportunity to discuss these important issues, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Shout out to Chairwoman Miss Waters. Web 2, Web 3, Web... Bleh.
Thank you.
Web 2, Web...
Mr. Brooks, let's step back from digital assets and blockchain for a moment. Let's talk about...
Dude, this guy's a boss.
Where the internet was, where it's come to, where it's going, right? We're trying to level set here for policymakers. So originally, the internet was a read-only format, in essence. We're consuming information. And then there's additional layers that we place on. It became much more interactive. But counterintuitively, much more interactive, but much more centralized in Web 1, Web 2. What we're hearing now is Web 3. Policymakers need to understand the nature of Web 3. This is a hearing about a component of Web 3. Now, along those lines, what are the characteristics that defined Web 1 and Web 2?
Mr. McHenry, thank you very much for that question. I think that's critical to understanding what we're all trying to build here. So the characteristic of Web 1, if people remember their original AOL account, was an ability to look in a curated walled garden at a set of content that was not interactive but was presented to you on AOL the way that Time magazine used to show you the articles they wanted you to see inside of their magazine.
Just like cheat codes for Grand Theft Auto 3 on Google. You just look up your cheat codes and there it is displayed for you. Non-interactive Web 1 solution to such an important problem.
Just you could see it on a screen. The innovation of Web 2 was that suddenly you could not only read content, but you could also write content. This is when the blogosphere became a big thing. People remember this from the late 90s, the early 2000s. The reason for the centralization of the internet, of course, was that all of that activity was being monetized by a very small number of companies. Facebook, as the chairwoman mentions, Google, and 2 or 3 other companies. What makes Web 3 different is the ability to own the actual network. And that's what crypto assets themselves represent, is an ownership stake in an underlying network. So when you hear people talk about, for example, layer 1 tokens, what they mean is this is your reward for providing the ledger maintenance services, the computing power to the network that on Web 1 and 2 was done by Google, right? So now people in my hometown of Pueblo, Colorado can actually own the Ethereum network, but they can't own the internet. That's owned by Google and a few other companies. That's what the project of crypto is all about, is allowing people to directly own the networks that have native assets that are supporting it, and that's the nature of decentralization, where the token holders are the people who control the asset, not
so
Google.
Token holders, for our language here on the Hill, those are digital assets, right, which are the keys to open up the ledger for you to participate, right?
Correct.
So describe to us how those digital assets fit into this internet revolution, Web 3.
So the concept is that you have sort of application layer tokens and you have protocol layer tokens. So if I'm an owner of Bitcoin, let's say that I'm a miner of Bitcoin, somebody who actually creates Bitcoin.
Shout out to Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is the reward I receive for doing the work to keep the network operational, and that allows me to own a piece of the Bitcoin blockchain. Or take Ethereum, which is easier to understand. The Ether token represents an ownership stake in the network, but on top of that,
I just want to say that I don't understand why he thinks, I don't know why he said he thinks that Ethereum is easier to understand than Bitcoin. I think it's actually significantly harder to understand what Ethereum does than Bitcoin. Bitcoin is so much simpler than Ethereum, so it's just a weird comment.
That network are all kinds of apps that get built on the network, much like the apps on your phone depend on the underlying network existing that lets the phone operate. And so people will make judgments about which network is likely to win, and they will invest in the tokens in that network much the same way you might invest in Google stock because you think Google is going to scale access to the original internet. The difference being here, you can vote on what happens in the future of a proof of stake network, for example. You can get rewarded through a proof of work token for maintaining a ledger on something like Bitcoin. But the real message here is that what happens on the decentralized internet is decided by the investors, versus what happens on the main internet is decided by Twitter, Facebook, Google, and a small number of other companies.
Okay, so getting this layer on digital assets right, for Congress to understand this, everything is built upon that on-ramp to this new internet. So very important for us to be sensitive to how this develops and any actions we take in terms of laws and updating laws to incorporate these new technologies.
Yeah, Mr. McHenry, couldn't agree more, and I think when you hear about all of the problems of different big tech companies, the importance of an owner-controlled network becomes clear.
Okay, owner-controlled network rather than a cooperative, right? And
Yes.
thinking in those terms.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you're not a part of management, you're not making a decision in Web 2. If you are a participant in the network, you're cooperating in the making of those decisions.
Exactly right.
Okay. So I ask this not to be insulting to the panel, but to have a level set here so we have an understanding of what we're talking about. This is not simply about you on this panel. It is about trillions of dollars of assets that did not exist before Satoshi wrote his white paper 13 years ago. It's about $3 trillion in notional value at this stage around the development of a whole new range, a whole new suite of technology that will be developed across the globe, whether or not the United States embraces it and wants to compete, or if it's pushed offshore. So as policymakers, we need to understand what we're talking about here. This is a small panel, important as you may be, a small panel about the discussion about Web3. And so with that, Madam Chair, thank you for having this hearing, and I hope that we can have more understanding by policymakers about these important concepts. Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Dude, Mr. McHenry is a boss. What's crazy is he probably knows more about Web3 and technology than most other Congress people, and yet even he is like struggling sometimes with the terminology and like the concepts he's even asking about. I can't imagine what some of these older Congress people are even like, how they even can start to comprehend what they just said, right? So I like that there's an advocate for Web3, like who's pushing these questions in the narrative, but like it's going to take so much for Congress to come together on some sort of consensus within the United States. Like but listen to the words they're saying. These would be crazy words to be hearing 4 years ago during the last bull run. This is like totally different ecosystem this time around. A bubble. Here we go. Let's talk about a bubble.
At what point should we become concerned about the possibility of a bubble? Let's start, if we may, with Mr. Brian Brooks.
Yeah, where's my bull run?
Well, thank you, Congressman Green. It's terrific to see you again, and I always find your questions extremely perceptive. What I would say about that question is a lot of the price volatility of cryptocurrency has to do with the early stage of the market and the thinly traded nature of the asset compared to, for example, U.S. real estate, global equities, or anything like that. I think the message I'd land with this committee in response to your question, however, is some of the things that make U.S. equity and debt markets more stable and less volatile have to do with the fact that there's a lot more price discovery in those areas. And what I mean by that is, in the U.S. we have regulated equity mutual funds. We have derivatives products and futures products that allow the free trading on a 24/7 basis that provides the market with forecasts of what's happening in the ecosystem. In the world of crypto, the U.S. hasn't responded by developing those tools for price discovery yet, and so the result in a relatively new, relatively thinly traded market is that one person unwinding their position can have a massive effect on the price. The last point I would just make very quickly is something like 80% of Bitcoin holders have never sold a Bitcoin. And so when you hear about a day when there was a giant price drop in Bitcoin, often it turns out that there was one or two large traders who were unwinding a leveraged position, and the vast majority of holders have enough confidence in it that they've literally never sold a unit of it. So
is that true though? Has the 80% of Bitcoin not been sold? Because I don't know if I believe that. Lath says, "Wow, I couldn't agree more. Wow about this whole thing," but I don't know if 80%, because I watch Glassnode reviews where during certain bear and peak during times in the market where 50% of the crypto has been either traded. So I don't see how it could be 80%. That doesn't seem right, but hey, maybe he's got his statistics from somewhere else, right?
I would argue we need more liquidity and more price discovery to tamp down volatility, not less.
More leverage, please. Thank you. Quantum computing. I will say, I really enjoyed this entire Congress chat, even though most of it, if you didn't watch the full 4 hours and 50 minutes, which most of it was pretty boring. All they did was talk about stablecoins. So I'll wrap it up for you if you haven't watched the whole thing. How can we trust stablecoins? What the hell are stablecoins? And how do we regulate stablecoins? That was like 75% of the conversation. The other 25% was this stuff, which was Web3. And then this question came up in quantum computing, which I thought was really interesting.
So one of the things we hear about blockchain is that it's invulnerable, it's impenetrable, it's something that's super secure. And our responsibility is to make sure that things are generally safe, generally honest, that people aren't swindled. So I also sit on the science committee with Mr. Luchtemeier, and the ranking member was talking about we're at W3, all right? In the science committee, we're doing a lot on quantum computing. And so my question to you is, what threats or benefits to a blockchain system will come from quantum computing?
Well, thank you for the question. In terms of the threats, some cryptographic algorithms are not, at least theoretically, might not be secure under quantum computing. Obviously, this is going to depend on the exact details of what comes. And it's important that, if and when that comes, that, blockchain security algorithms are resistant to that. On the same front, I think it has the potential to create basically new cryptographic algorithms that are faster, that are more secure, and that are, more efficient from a number of different perspectives. So we'll see what happens there.
I will say, I think John McAfee explained this quite well when it came to quantum computing. Like, if you have a quantum computer that's able to hack something like Bitcoin, then you can also build a quantum computer that also can create quantum cryptography. So you run into the same problem where you can just quantumly cryptographically secure a new blockchain in that field of energy, or I guess, so like, yeah, Bitcoin might be vulnerable, but you can always just move the chain into a new cryptographically secure version, which is quantum resistant. So it was interesting. You don't just get one side of the equation, you also get the other, which is the defense to quantum computing is quantum computing as well, right? So, and he's got a PhD in, I think, these kind of things, so it's interesting answer.
All right, I have a million other questions, but I don't have enough time to ask them. I'll yield back.
The definition of digital assets.
Mr. Brooks, I will start with you. And this is a bit of a follow-up to Ms. Wagner's question, but do you think Congress needs to introduce legislation to provide more definitional clarity with respect to digital assets? And if so, do you have any specific suggestions?
Well, I really appreciate that question. That is the most important issue in the short term for the industry. And so let me just pick up where Mrs. Wagner left off. If the question is the current test clear, it's clear in the sense that we know what it is. It's not clear in that it's a four-factor balancing test. So I often think about what like the U.S. trucking industry would be like if the truckers didn't know that the speed limit was 75 miles an hour. They just had a four-factor test of general safety having to do with how much sleep they got the night before, the overall size of their payload, and other factors. People need to know what the speed limit is. In my old agency, the OCC, what would happen is a bank would come to us with a new activity proposal, and we would give them an answer. We would either give them a non-objection or we would not give them a non-objection, and it was very clear whether they would be allowed to access that. What happens in the United States is you have a new crypto project, and you walk into the SEC and you describe it in great detail, and you ask for guidance, and they say, we can't tell you, and you list it at your own peril. So whether this comes from legislation that defines what is a security and what isn't a security, or whether it comes from Congress in the form of legislative discretion to an agency to say what is a security, I would argue that a four-factor balancing test is no better here than it is as truckers drive down the highway guessing what safe is.
Yeah, and Chairman Gensler has been quoted as saying the test to determine whether a crypto asset is a security is clear. Mr. Brooks, do you agree that that test is clear? I take it from your previous answer, the answer is no.
It's definitely not clear. We have people in the LivePeer community that are trying to run nodes, and they don't want to run them in the state of New York because New York has strict rules on Web3 assets. But then in the same breath, different states like Nevada, I guess, don't have these problems. So you're limited to where you can even run a staking pool within the United States, which is crazy because you're not even necessarily in taking investment from people. You're just getting stake, which is still their own money. But it's just so confusing. How can you regulate a staking node when no one even knows really what it is? Try explain it to a congressperson. They're just not gonna have no idea.
Oh. But could you walk me through the process that exists today to determine if a digital asset is a security?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. The best test that is out there is a test that several of us on this panel actually helped to develop about 3 years ago as part of an industry organization called the Crypto Rating Council. When I came to see several of you several years ago in connection with the Crypto Rating Council, the way I described it to you was it's sort of like motion picture ratings for crypto. We don't know authoritatively what's a security and what isn't because no authority will tell us. But what we can do at least is we can tell you the difference between an R-rated asset and a PG-rated asset, and people can make their risk tolerance judgments. So the way that process works is it's an objective, quantitatively based process that asks several dozen questions about the asset across each of the dimensions of the Howey test. It gives you a number, and that number tells you how close you might be to danger and how far away you are.
Let me interrupt and just say, I recognize that some rules or federal regulation of both digital assets and cryptocurrency trading platforms might be supportive of bringing clarity, but I'd never underestimate the ability of the federal government and regulators to stifle innovation. Can you give me an example of an overreach that would stifle innovation?
Well, the idea would be to say to let traveler's checks exist inside the banking system and not bring a stablecoin issuer inside the banking system when they've applied.
Boom. The baseball reference.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a small business owner in Texas and still own those businesses. I'm a car dealer and a former professional baseball player. And when I'm trying to wrap my head around a new topic like cryptocurrencies, I try to relate it back to something I understand, like baseball or business. Now, some of you may know this, but modern-day baseball can really be attributed to Babe Ruth. He brought in the live ball era of the time and introduced power to the baseball diamond, and before this, teams would play small ball that was very conservative, where teams would literally play for 1 run a game. The entire objective was simply to get the ball in play so they could try to steal their way around the base pass. And there was nothing wrong with this old way of playing, but when the White Sox won the World Series in 1906, the entire team had a total of 6 home runs all year. But Babe Ruth came along. Babe Ruth came along and totally changed everything. In 1920, he set the American League record of home runs with 54. To put that into perspective, how fantastic this feat was at the time, the previous mark to be set was by Sox Siebold in 1902 with just 16. This introduced an entire generation of new baseball fans, and for the first time ever, the New York Yankees, over 1 million fans came to see them in a single season. Now, with that being said, many of you are becoming the Babe Ruth in the financial space, services space. You're introducing a blockchain technology to the financial services industry and working to upend the tradition and the traditional way of doing business. And while many economists and so-called experts have been calling on the downfall of cryptocurrency and discounting the future of blockchain technologies, all of you were working tirelessly to create something new in order to bring this new technology to the masses. Unfortunately, it would only take a few misguided curveballs, we'll say, from Washington to undo some of the progress you've all put into this motion. So my first question to you, Mr. Brooks, can you talk about some of the negative consequences that could happen if we take a heavy-handed approach to regulating this developing technology?
Well, Mr. Williams, as a long-suffering Dodgers fan, I share a lot of the things you're talking about, and I think the era you're talking about was an era when baseball went from focusing on not losing to an era where it focused on winning. And winning and not losing are not the same thing. So I come back to Mr. Vargas's question a second ago, which I think is the right way to answer your question. You know, Mr. Vargas asked the question of people have the potential to lose a lot of money. These things are volatile, they're risky. How do we protect them from those kinds of issues? There are 2 ways of answering that. One is to prevent as many people as possible from accessing this amazing technology. For example, the way the current legal regime works is certain kinds of assets can only be purchased by accredited investors, meaning rich people. So the only people who can get rich on this are people who are already rich. That'd be one way of protecting people from losing money, is to make sure that only the richest can access it. Another way of addressing it would be to make it safer the way that we made equities safer 40 years ago, right? We created mutual funds, diversification, sector funds, and other things that make it easier for regular Americans from places like my hometown in Colorado to buy equities without having to be stock experts. Strangely, in the US, we've refused to do that so far. So we don't allow crypto mutual funds. We don't allow people to diversify the way that they do in Canada, Germany, Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, and a series of other regulated economies around the world. So I would argue the way to win is to bring more people into the system more safely, not to keep them out at their own peril.
I will say, though, that they are building like a lot of basket DeFi protocols. Like there's one built by a guy named Nico, and he's building tenderize.me, and it's this ability to use this DeFi protocol where you can just like buy into a basket of the best Web3 protocols, and it pays you interest. And so like in the decentralized world, that's being created, but in the traditional world, specifically in the US, like I don't even know if you can buy grayscale funds that are baskets, right? Like it's pretty messed up, and he's right. You should not have to be just like you shouldn't be a stock picker. You should also probably not be a crypto picker if you know nothing about crypto, but yet you're just like long shotting it on these shit coins that you think are going to go up in value, and you have no idea what they do. Like, so I do believe he's got a really good point there, and hopefully they'll bring out basket style investments like mutual fund of ETFs or for crypto at some point. That would be the best. Yeah, and so this next one, how do you enforce a law against a blockchain? This is a good one.
I'm going to interject. Mr. Brooks, I have a question about the challenge of enforcing laws in a world of decentralization, whether it be law enforcement relating to financial crimes or SEC disclosure. How exactly do you enforce the law when there is no central entity against which to enforce the law? How do we grapple with that challenge?
That is a great question, Mr. Torres. I really appreciate you asking it. So I'd say a couple things about it. First of all, to the extent that some of the activity we're talking about is parallel to activity that happens in the supervised system, my question is, why don't we allow it in the supervised system? Again, you've heard me say it before this morning, but you have on this panel a big stablecoin issuer who's applied for a bank charter. Doesn't look like they're going to get it. Easiest way to supervise that would be to let them in the banking system and have the OCC have authority over them. So I'd start with that. The second point is, lots of these decentralization protocols are designed to solve the exact problems that create the need for enforcement in the first place, because most enforcement in the securities and banking system is about some combination of human error, human negligence, human greed, or human bias. And the point of some of these decentralized systems is to take that out and have an open source piece of software everybody can look at and do with those things algorithmically. So as an example, I used to sit on a bank credit committee. We would decide who got credit and who didn't. And I think we had a really good system for it, but we were human beings. We might have been indulging in implicit bias. We might have made mistakes. Algorithms don't do that. So some of the need for what you're talking about goes away in a decentralized system.
Love it. Is blockchain secure?
And I know there are critics who have said that the blockchain might not be as secure and as unhackable as advertised. But for me, the proper question is not whether the blockchain is perfectly secure and unhackable. The question is whether it's better than everything else. Like Winston Churchill famously said, democracy is the worst form of government with the exception of everything else. Is there a computer network that is more secure than the blockchain?
Well, I think the beauty of the blockchain is not that it's perfectly secure, it's that it's perfectly transparent. So you can see when somebody's screwed around.
But I want to specifically address security. Is there a computer network, to your knowledge, that is more secure than the blockchain?
I don't know of one, but we have a PhD in physics sitting right next to me, so we'll let him answer.
If you're talking about any major globally used blockchain, I don't know of one. There are small blockchains that are less secure. All the major ones are incredibly secure.
Boom. United States versus other countries.
I'm going to have to move really quickly. I'm going to go to Mr. Brooks on a couple of things. Would you describe why establishing these clear rules of the road is important? An important step before we add additional regulation and consider that regulation?
Well, Mr. Huizenga, it's good to see you again. I think the most important reason of many is international competitiveness. So other countries make this easier. Okay, let me just make clear, other companies make this easier, other countries. I just came yesterday from the Middle East, where in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they have super clear derivatives regulations, super clear ETF regulation. They're trying to lure Americans over there to build these products, and they're moving there.
So how are they viewing these crypto assets differently than traditional assets? I mean, what Rubicon have they crossed that we haven't? And why is it important to think about digital assets differently?
Well, I think one of the things that they've figured out is that crypto actually is less fundamentally different than equities and debt than you think it is. It's a risk-on asset that people want to invest in. They want to invest in it in Canada, so Canada builds a regime for it. They want to do it in Germany. We're the last country standing that hasn't figured that out. It's a risk-on asset that people want exposure to as part of asset diversification.
As opposed to traditional assets.
Correct.
There you go. No, yeah. Why is it any different than any other security? Like, if you want to go buy one, go buy one. Campus Gains, I think there's one DeFi index, maybe in Canada or one of these other places. I don't think it's in the US, though. Data security.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for having this hearing. I think it's very intriguing and very timely with where we are with the progression of technology. I go back and I think about my 30 years I spent in the IT field. Had the government gotten in the way of the internet, we would still be using dial-up today to do a lot of what we're doing. So I think we have to proceed very cautiously. One thing I've learned in the 30 years in the IT sector, especially 10 years that I spent in the intelligence realm in the Air Force, is the most important aspect from an IT perspective is data security, cybersecurity. It's something we have to be focused on all the time. In fact, in my business, 20 years in the private sector, that was the #1 issue for most of my customers, and really got to the point when I ran for Congress. Of course, I couldn't continue that business. I sold it, primarily because I knew that under the way things were, the question wasn't if someone was going to be hacked and lose data, it was when. And so one of the things that I learned when I was in the military is one principle is you don't have to secure what you don't have. So if you don't need data, don't keep it. But then you have the aspect of, yes, we have to secure the data that we do need to keep. Now, this is one thing that the federal government has yet to learn, is you don't need to acquire a whole lot of data and keep that data, especially if you're the federal government, which is the riskiest of anyone out there of letting data get out.
Unless you want to spy on your citizens, of course.
And then you see more proposals like the one that we've heard recently. The craziest proposal is the banks have to report every transaction by Americans in their banks to the federal government. This is the type of thing that we don't need to be doing. However, there is data that is important that we do have, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the public sector. And that's where I see the value of the underlying technology of cryptocurrency, particularly blockchain, is a solution to our cybersecurity problems because of the distributed ledger aspect of it. Is the data is available but is not centrally located to where it could be taken. Mr. Brooks, can you discuss how blockchain and distributed ledger technology can enhance our cybersecurity posture?
Well, Mr. Loudermilk, it's good to see you, and I appreciate the question. The simplest answer, as I said earlier today, is that blockchains are as much about transparency as they are about security. So one of the biggest problems when you think about the biggest cyber hacks we've ever had in the United States is how long it took for us to figure out that they occurred. The case of Target, the case of Equifax, some of these things. We found out days and weeks later by accident that they occurred. And if you think about the Equifax hack in particular, initially we thought it was a small problem. Weeks later, we learned it was a medium-sized problem, and only months later did we learn it was a gigantic problem that involved all of our data.
I think it was referring to is the 81 million people hacked on Equifax, which I was a part of, actually. I got an email from Equifax saying I got a free year subscription to updates on my credit score because in case someone used my data. They gave me 1 free year subscription. Like, what a joke.
Because there was no transparency. The thing about blockchains is every single block as it is validated is publicly visible to the network. The other thing about blockchain is it's based on a consensus mechanism. So before you can have a change to the ledger, you have to have a significant majority of all of the validators agree that that's the correct change. And so unlike normal networks where one bad guy can defeat the entire system, here you have to have thousands of computers agreeing at the same time that the change can be made, and even then everyone sees it. That hiding in plain sight aspect is the safest thing about blockchain. It's why it's so critical to our security infrastructure.
And I think that's one of the most key values of this emerging technology, is bringing us into a new era where we can do some of the things that we need to do without amassing this data.
Web3 culture, here we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I truly appreciate this hearing. This is a great hearing. I want to start with Mr. Brooks, and I'm going to attempt to respond to some of the objections, which I believe demonstrate a complete and utter misunderstanding of what we're even doing here today. One contention is that the vibe of crypto is a stick-it-to-the-man vibe, but in actuality, it's dominated and controlled by big tech and Wall Street. While the culture may be somewhat accurately described, the notion that a handful of big tech leaders and Wall Street banks somehow created and now control crypto is absurd on its face. And frankly, anyone who would make such a claim, I believe, should be ignored on this topic. My contention is that Web3, crypto, blockchain, et cetera, by its very structure, has the ability to solve some of the most difficult and frustrating problems that the current version of the internet and the financial system have, where a narrow set of platforms control what we see, how we interact, and what we buy, while millions of Americans remain completely disconnected from the financial system. Web3 can turn this entire thing on its head in a very empowering way. So my question is simple. How specifically could you see Web3 solving some of these bigger challenges associated with the current version of the internet and the financial system?
Well, Congressman Gonzalez, thanks for the question. When I go back to the criticisms that you're just recounting, the only part of that I heard was hip. I'm going with hip. The rest of it, we can come to. But in terms of the problems being solved, I think the first issue is the biggest critics of cryptocurrency have been the biggest banks. Those are the people who are the most concerned about the entry of stable coins into the payment system, about the ability of crypto assets to build networks that are away from the clearinghouse. Those are the biggest critics. And so I think that tells you a lot of what you need to know. And the reason is because the way that Web3 solves a lot of problems, it's really twofold. First of all, it eliminates the toll collector role of traditional banks and traditional broker-dealers. The main thing that they do is they employ large numbers of human beings maintaining ledgers of account and allocating credit for a fee. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies do that without human beings and with no fee. And the elimination of minimum account balance fees, the $25 wire transfer fee that your bank charges to give you 3 days to send money abroad, those are gone. Okay?
Thank you.
That's what's so important. But the last part is it unlocks value that traditional economic structures don't unlock. The creator economy, play to earn in the gaming system, those don't exist.
So I want to go to Ms. Haas on that. Building off this, in your testimony you mentioned use cases for Web3 in the creator and gaming economies. Could you please outline a specific use case and discuss how Web3 can empower creators and artists over mega tech platforms, which was implied earlier? And quickly, please, if you could.
All right, let's talk really quickly. I'll cite the one that we just talked about earlier, which is in the month of November, play to earn. So these are where video games, one can play a video game and earn NFTs. Those NFTs are in-game experiences. So if anyone here has young kids who are playing with Roblox, playing with Minecraft, playing with these, there's in-game experiences where you can buy avatars, you can buy various things.
Shout out
these
to
can
Minecraft.
become NFTs. These NFTs then can be sold for value. And so what we're having here is these kind of the concept of a play to earn. You can play the video game, you can earn money, you can then monetize that back into fiat, and you can create these new economies and these new communities that have increasing value.
Thank you. Mr.
I'm not sure how well play-to-earn games work. They tried it in Diablo 3, and it didn't work too well. So I'm kind of curious how that ecosystem is going to grow.
Bankman-Fried, I believe you live in Hong Kong. Is that correct?
Sorry, repeat that?
Do you live in Hong Kong? Is that correct?
I do not anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, let me ask the question differently.
I did at one point.
So 10 years ago, certainly 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to start a major internet company, you probably wanted to do it in the United States. You probably wanted to do it where you grew up, in Stanford on the coast in Silicon Valley, for a whole host of reasons, one of which being a very, very conducive, innovative environment. When I look at Web3, I see a lot of projects moving overseas. To what degree is the current regulatory environment in the United States contributing to this change where projects are now being built and domiciled in nations not the United States, whereas in the previous versions of the internet they were?
I do think it has contributed to that. I'm optimistic that we're going to see changes to the framework over the next few years that will bring us into a world that can make the United States the source of the deepest and most liquid markets in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. I don't think we've seen that historically. And if you look at the difference between the volume distribution of crypto and digital assets versus most other industries, you can see that.
I will say that during this entire thing, the U.S. a lot of Congress people have been like, how do we stay number one? How does America stay number one? And not asking the question, like, how does blockchain empower the world, right? Like, it's kind of interesting how Americans are so tied to the idea that being number one is probably the most important thing, not how to empower the average or poor person who might be on the other side of the planet, right? Like, it just kind of shows like a narcissistic way of looking at things. Anvish says, well, no fee is debatable. I mean, if you're on Ethereum, yeah, if you're trading NFTs, and yeah, of course, Ethereum fees are really high. I mean, Solana still technically has fees, although it is 1/100,000th of a penny. Technically, it's still a fee, and like layer 2 is going to have fees and stuff. There's definitely not going to be no fees in the crypto world, but I'm sure they will come down over time. That's definitely a promise, or a hope at least.
Brooks, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Congressman, as I said earlier, there are certain activities that our G20 partners seem to think are perfectly appropriate, legitimate, and subject to regulation, and we keep resisting. Those have moved abroad.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
How to regulate Web3?
So I want to turn to you. Thank you for a moment, Mr. Brooks. If you were king for a day and you were going to tell us, here's what you need to do to structure the regulatory framework, in a minute and 39 seconds, tell us what that would look like.
I love it how Congress, they get 5 minutes to answer these questions. So they're like, in a minute, can you just explain how you're going to solve the blockchain problem for the world? Like, yeah, just go ahead. 1 minute.
I can barely introduce myself in a minute and 39 seconds, Congressman. I come back to the concept of parity. I don't know why we believe that incumbent institutions are risk-free and anything new is highly risky. So if I have a platform built on a blockchain that is doing lending, I don't know why it's so hard for us to say that can participate in our banking system. If I decide that XRP is a security, why won't we let it list on a US exchange? The problem is we treat crypto assets differently from all other assets. And the answer is just recognize them for what they are. These are assets that represent some underlying activity. It could be a network, it could be an application. They have a value that people are willing to buy and sell at. Let them in. That would be my message. Let them in.
Yeah, right? LivePeer, let them in. Why not? The Graph, let them in. Filecoin, let them in. These are great projects. Like, it's obviously Dogecoin and Shiba Inu, like, maybe don't let them in. But guess what? Those people are going to get in anyway. I had a friend that wanted to buy Axia coin or some... Dude, it was just a complete scam right off the top. And the bank wouldn't let them transfer the money to the other bank account because they're like, this is clearly a scam. He found a way. Like, the people that want to get in will get in and lose their money regardless. So, like, you're not really protecting many people. But yeah, there are some pretty big scams out there. Are we in a bubble? Another bubble question. I love it.
I thank the chairwoman, and I thank all of you for being here today and testifying before us. I want to start in a general way, and I'm thinking, Mr. Brooks, of what you said about the practice of law. With the advent of emails, I was a younger lawyer then and remember all the fears around it. And so, as has been said, and this is really a follow-up to what Mr. Green asked long ago, hours ago, it's obviously clearly a fast-growing and a bit mysterious market. Looking at the total cryptocurrency market cap over the last year, as some here have reported, it exploded from about $500 billion a year ago to now almost $3 trillion as of last month.
500 billion to 3 trillion? Come on, guys. Let's pump that up. Those are some weak numbers. Let's get up to that 20 trillion. Let's just, come on, YOLO.
But it's also clearly a volatile, fast-moving market. As of last night, the total market cap is back down closer to $2.4 trillion. Another example of volatility in Bitcoin, which lost half of its value over just 2 days in March before rebounding. So to that notion, to the people who find all of this a bit mysterious, are we at risk? Do we see warning signs of a bubble in this marketplace, if I'm allowed to call it that? What do we do to make sure that the industry does not threaten the overall stability of our financial system? Maybe, Mr. Brooks, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's good to see you again. I'll just give you a very quick anecdote. When I was practicing law, I represented one of the largest mutual fund complexes in the United States, and in their market room, they had a chart, a physical chart showing the U.S. equity market from 1792 to the present. What I remember about this room is it was a full city block long, and if you stood at the end of the room and looked at that chart, it was a straight line up and to the right. But if you walked right up close to the chart, you could very clearly see the Civil War and the Panic of 1907 and the Great Depression and all kinds of other volatility along the way. What I would tell you is, in the beginning of a fundamental technological revolution like this, the early days are going to see turbulence, but the long chart of crypto in only its 11-year history is up and to the right, just like the U.S. equity market. So what I would say is, there are risks, there's disclosures that ought to be had, there's framework regulations should be adopted, but the fact that the price goes up and down doesn't make it any different from U.S. equity markets in the first 100 years of the country's existence.
Right, up, and right. It's just happening. I do agree that with like Bitcoin and Ethereum are probably going to do that. I do think a lot of these shit coins and bad projects and just meme coins are going to go to zero at some point. But yeah, like Bitcoin, Ethereum are definitely on that trend of just being up and right for probably the long term. You gotta love the 1.5 minutes for presenting a solution. Right? 1.5 minutes to solve the world's problems. Yeah, funny how the system works. Although I question whether DAOs can do it much better. I've seen how a couple DAOs work, and it's kind of similar in its clunkiness. We'll have to see how those type of structures work into the future. I don't think they'll be much faster. However, they will be much more progressive. Underserved community inclusion.
Madam Chairwoman. As you may know, I serve as the ranking member on the Select Committee on the Economy along with Chairman Himes, both of us also members of this committee. And we're holding the first of two roundtables tomorrow on financial inclusion and access to banking for underserved communities, a topic we talk a lot about also in this committee and an issue front of mind for many underserved communities around the United States. And so, Mr. Brooks, I'd love to get your thoughts on the relevance of today's topic for financial inclusion and how the growth in digital assets and decentralized finance can actually drive inclusion, and can underserved communities benefit from these developments?
I love that question, and thank you for giving me a chance to address it. A couple of things. So first of all, let's ask, why do we have so many underbanked people in the United States? And the answer is a combination of minimum balance fees, monthly account maintenance fees, and all kinds of other things that are a hallmark of the money center model that banking is built on, right? If you talk to Mr. Allaire about his product, he would tell you they don't have any minimum balance fees. They don't have any monthly maintenance fees. You can keep your assets in a tokenized bank deposit for free. So that's the first answer, is there are no $10 a month fees. There are no $25 wire charges. Those things don't exist that eat away at your life savings.
There's only $100 ETH fees, but that's for another conversation.
A. And B, the next most important thing about crypto is, here you have an early stage asset which, unlike the IPO boom, unlike venture capital, doesn't require that you know a guy or that you be well connected or that you be an accredited investor to participate. This is a chance for underrepresented communities to be in on the wealth creation stage of some new thing as opposed to coming in at the end.
I will mention that one. I'm a part of an angel investing group, and I will say that the concept of like the wealthy getting wealthier because they get into deals earlier, and that you have to be accredited in order to do that in the first place, is like a real thing. One thing that the ICO craze of 2017 taught us is that like it levels the playing ground of people that can get into really good projects. Like look at ETH. You could buy ETH at 0.50 cents. And now it's $4,000, and you didn't have to be accredited. You didn't have to know a guy. You have the ability of getting into things that if you are good enough, or if you're early enough, or you understand enough, you get rewarded for that. So I do think that that's like super, super powerful.
So what I always say is, That's the way you solve underrepresentation, is through wealth creation. This is an opportunity, and that is why there are more minority investors than white investors in crypto in the United States, is because
I appreciate your comments, because I think in general technology is one of the key aspects that we have to really address some of the underserved communities in the United States, and agree with your comments. You may enjoy our hearing tomorrow on the Select Committee on the Economy. To build further, what do you see as the main regulatory impediments to further innovation in this space, if we think it's really going to help us on the inclusionary aspect?
It's all incumbency protection. The big banks don't like this. The big banks have been slow to adopt because they make a lot of money on those fees I just mentioned.
Okay, so let me keep going with you if I can, Mr. Brooks, in the time that we have. In your opening testimony, you talked about the do no harm approach, and that approach helped bring in a period of tremendous growth and opportunity in really Web 1. You mentioned that some of the countries that U.S. crypto businesses are moving to. What are some of the examples of the positive approaches to digital asset regulation that you see in those countries? You had to put your finger on it.
Well, for example, responding to market demand. If a whole bunch of customers want to buy a Bitcoin ETF, why is it our business to say they can't do it, right? I mean, you see this domestically, New York versus the rest of the United States. Lots of investors like to buy certain tokens. New York won't let New Yorkers buy tokens. So they're safe in Nebraska, not safe in New York. Why would that be?
There you go. That would be the entire, I guess that is the sum of all the questions of the best of that whole 4-hour, 50-minute meeting. The rest of it was basically just stablecoins, we hate crypto, stablecoins, how dare you, stablecoin. So if you watch the rest of it, you feel free. But I think those were the clips that were the most important and most intriguing in general for the crypto community, and most relevant to Web3 products and projects like LivePeer or the Graph, or any of these projects that are actually trying to build a decentralized world, but also just like a real project, not just a scam coin. So I believe the crypto space needs to resolve the scam/fraud problem that big banks have generally solved for a majority of people. Yeah, I do think that, but like they are building, like, what was Mr. Brooks talked about the risk committee. I mean, they're already rating projects on their scamminess, right? So you can go to an authority of experts who rate these things on a scale of 1 to 10 on their risk level. So, I think the crypto community will regulate themselves in a lot of ways. But I think people will also buy things that are stupid, that they don't understand. And whose fault is that? If they don't understand it, like, it's not the project's fault for people not understanding that maybe it's not a good idea, right? There's, to a certain degree, sanitized investments are good because, your average bus driver shouldn't have to be an investor. But at the same time, like, you shouldn't restrict people from trying to invest in things that they do understand, right? So that's why I think big banks are really slow. Yeah, big banks, I mean, they have their place, but they're also kind of dying dinosaurs in the world. So, in general, I think this was a huge step forward in Web3, in the entire crypto ecosystem. Even though we're seeing a lull in the market right now, we saw Bitcoin drop from about 68,000. Actually, it was right around the day that this Congress meeting happened that we had a giant long squeeze happen, and the liquidation. Tons of people got liquidated on their longs, and we saw Bitcoin flash crash from about 57 to about 47 in about an hour. So I don't think it was because of this, but it did coincide roughly with the timeline. Because to me, this is bullish. This Congress talking about this is bullish for the entire ecosystem, and I think it just gives actual people the idea that maybe this is real and for the people. So banks have had over 300 years to solve this problem, right? And they still can't solve it. Banks cannot solve the problem of fraud, right? In fact, the entire ecosystem of fraud is pretty much in the banking system, even baked in. I mean, you go watch the Dirty Money series on Netflix, and you'll see like HSBC and like Wells Fargo, like they are the problem in a lot of sense, right? Crypto is, I guess, more like the Wild West, so you got to be careful. But I think as it matures, there's going to be opportunity for some big gains, but also, opportunity to regulate and for people to slowly understand the ecosystem. Sajid says, I agree with what you're saying about being a major step. A lot of attention is being paid because the real money inflows going into the space. Yeah, well, and that's what brings the attention, is the idea of rising prices and people can get rich quick. Specifically, Dogecoin, SafeMoon, these projects that are pretty crap, but yet they go up in price, so it gets people's attention, right? But like I did in 2013, and like many did when I got into it, you learn about crypto because of the gains, but you stay for the technology, right? It started off as, hey, I could get some gains and I can stay, and this is interesting, and I'm going to look at price charts. And then as time goes on, you're like, wait, what is this technology? Why don't I take a course on blockchain programming? Next thing you know, doing a program on Solidity, understanding that, and you realize this is a whole big beast that's way beyond just getting a bunch of money and trying to take other people's money by the price rising, right? So I think that's really interesting. No, they can't, but there is some resource. No. I don't know what you mean. What are you referring to? No, they can't. There's no fees statement. Oh, the no fee statement. The crypto experts have obviously never seen Titan Node. Leroy into the market, mainnet, screaming, what is a testnet? Yes, well, Titan Node has known to spend lots of gas fee on absolutely YOLOing into new projects. Not even new projects, just like trying to set up a node and not trying it on testnet first. Funny enough, I have never launched a node or interacted with a protocol on testnet for the first time once in my career in crypto. It's always been mainnet first try, which is the only time I've ever used a testnet is when I was building my first Solidity smart contract, and I was just trying to figure out how to actually do it because I didn't even know what I was doing. That was the only time I ever used a faucet and got ETH on a testnet. Otherwise, every protocol I've ever launched a node on, invested in, interacted with a smart contract, DeFi swap back when it was brand new, that was real tokens. So, and then when I built my first LivePeer node, that was all real tokens as well. So yeah, I've maybe don't do what I do, but that's what you can't learn unless you really YOLO it, right? I think Congress recognizing, Thomas says, I think Congress recognizing crypto as legit and crypto admitting it needs regulated is a sign of maturity, and the two can work on regulation together. It has never happened before. Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised it's taken this long. Like, I was watching, I got into crypto in 2013. I joined the Bitcoin Foundation in 2014. And back then, I was looking at starting like a crypto fund, and there was no guidelines whatsoever. And that was already 5 years old at that point. We're now 12 years old into Bitcoin. And now we're just having the conversation about how to regulate it specifically for cryptos. Like, I know they do regulation through the FTC and like SEC and like other things, but they're super not clear, and there's nothing crypto specific. They try to do the bit license in New York, but it's a decade old, which is really interesting because if you think about it, when the internet was a decade old, where were we? What year was it, right? Arguably, the internet started in 1989 during the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that was the beginning of the information age. So 10 years later, you're 1999, and guess what happened in 2000? So maybe we're at that, history might not exactly repeat itself, but it sure looks like it. And we might be at that crux where this is now the 2000 bubble rearing its head up, and maybe this is just the beginning of one of the largest worldwide bubbles. And so maybe Congress does want to protect people, because a lot of people will lose their money, which is really interesting. But the fact that they're talking about it, I think, is really important. So it just says the comment is big about the comment about the big banks solving the fraud problem. For example, credit cards giving people resources with unsecured credit is a good example. No. Yeah, like, I guess credit cards solve a bit of the fraud problem, because they can retract and deny transactions and send it back. I guess that's one, but that's like micro fraud. Like, we're talking about like if you want to talk about fraud, like, yeah, micro fraud, stealing of personal information, a credit card, sure, that's one type of fraud. But what about what is it? Madoff, is this Madoff? Yeah, Bernie Madoff, that was his name. He had a Ponzi scheme going for 30 years and got away with a $54 billion fund and he was the chair of the SEC, like, and he was the Ponzi man. Like, you want to talk about fraud, like, the problem is the banks don't even know how to control their own fraud. The only thing that's fraud proof is the proof of work or proof of stake hashes that these protocols make. So, you know, the blockchain is so much more transparent and secure than any bank. The only problem is, what project are you supporting? And guess what? There's going to be lots of projects that are Ponzi's, but guess what? One of the largest hedge funds in America was a Ponzi, and they didn't pick up on it. So, you know, credit cards are a great example of like micro fraud and like theft and petty cash, but they still haven't got away from, like, I mean, go watch the Dirty Money series on Netflix and go tell me that there isn't massive fraud in the world, in the current financial system, right? Madoff fooled the FTC and SEC. I think it is different. Yeah, they are different sectors, but like, he was the chair of the SEC, right? So, I mean, for 1 point, right? So if the chair of the SEC is running the largest Ponzi scheme, it's not a good look for regulation, right? There you go. Awesome. I appreciate everyone watching. If you did watch the whole video, awesome. You know, appreciate you having you guys here. If you guys want to just, you know, come back, check it out. I'll be doing another live stream shortly. Anyway, have yourself a great day, and I will see you on the next one.